It's wintertime and the holiday season. That means it's time for a snow scene painting. Today I'm going to share with you some tips on painting a snow scenery and share two painting demos. One very simple painting that's easy for everyone to follow, and one a bit more complex. So grab a coat, hot coffee, hot chocolate, hot tea, or whatever, and enjoy our winter time together. Hey, this is Eric from Cafe Watercolor. Snow is a beautiful natural phenomenon. I grew up in Taiwan, so I didn't get to see snow when I was little. Taiwan being a tropical island, you can only see snow at a very high altitude. After coming to the US, I live in Southern California, and snow is also really hard to come by unless you are high up in the mountains. Well, now that I live in Washington State, I get to see snow every year during winter. It's wonderful to see snow right where I live because it changes what I see every day into something special and beautiful. It's like when you decorate your home for a special occasion. Nature decorates the surrounding area with snow during the winter. Some places don't look so interesting, changed completely because of the snow. Now, I've seen a lot of snow photos and videos before, but to experience it in person feels completely different. And because I get to experience it in person, I am starting to incorporate my own experience in the painting. And that's what I want to share with you today. Here are three things I think a snow scenery should have. Number one is brightness. The term white as snow is real. When enough snow is accumulated, it becomes the whitest thing you see, unless there's dirt mixed in it or someone decided to make it yellow, if you know what I mean here. And because of that, snow sceneries is usually brighter unless you're painting a nice scene. Anything next to snow looks darker. So to bring out the white and the brightness of snow, you want to have enough contrast and preserve enough light. Number two, simplicity. Snow simplifies everything you see. Any surface facing the sky that gets covered by snow will turn white. It can make a complex scenery that filled with detail and texture, very unified and simple. You can have a street scene with different colors of rooftops, ground surfaces, and cars. With a layer of snow on top, everything turns white. So to reinforce that simplicity, it's good to keep your painting simple. Connect the shapes, leave out unnecessary details, and have a simple composition. And last one is quietness. This is more of a mood since painting doesn't make a physical sound. But quietness is something that I feel deeply when it's snowing. Unless you are in a ski resort or something, it's usually much quieter when it snows. There are fewer cars driving by and fewer people outside. Sometimes when it's snowing, I like to step outside just to hear the sound of snow. It is much more subtle than the rain, and the time seems to slow down. It's also very quiet visually. As I mentioned earlier, snow makes environment much simpler. It covers up many details and visual noise. So when I'm painting a snow scene, I hope I can convey a sense of quietness and peacefulness. Okay, so let me share with you the process of a very simple painting first. I invite you to follow along and see if you can end up with a nice, simple snow landscape painting. Okay, so let's try to paint this very simple snow scenery together. Actually, this photo that I'm going to paint, I painted the same scenery a couple years ago on my YouTube channel. This is a photo that I took a couple years ago in North Vancouver. And I really like this scenery. It was snowing pretty hard during that time, and I took a quick photo when I passed by this park, I think. And it's just such simple image, but it captures the snow day, the quietness and the brightness of the snow and everything that we talked about earlier. And for this painting, I'm using a paper that's pretty small. This is half of the page of a 14 by 10 paper. And I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible so you can follow along. And because of that, I am not fast forwarding this painting demo at all. So We will start by just doing a very simple line drawing. So looking at the photo, we're just going to draw the very simple shapes that we see. So this is this line that I'm doing right now. I'm just blocking out the shape of the tree. And here's a little bit of the red trees in the front. And some tree trunk and branches and stuff. And they don't have to look accurate at all. Okay, just somewhat close and you're good. And here is our main house right here. So here's a roof. So something like that. That should be good enough. Okay, and notice I didn't lift my pencil at all. I'm not lifting my pencil. And because we're trying to establish a good habit that we want to keep that fluidity, we want to keep the shape connected. And if I keep lifting my pencil, I will be tempted to trying to do a lot of details and stuff, and that's not what this painting is about. I'm trying to do a very simple painting. So I'm pretty much trying to draw the negative space. Okay, and it'll be very clear once we start painting. So the house, we try to make it a little bit wider and a little bit flatter so that we can kind of establish the vastness of this scenery. Here's a little bench right there. I'm just gonna draw a very simple rectangle with that a little bit flat seat right there. I'm using a very dull 4B pencil as well. That's just gonna force me not to go into the detail. So I'm gonna just block out this little bit of negative space, some snow on top, and there's some snow on the roof here, and there's also this kind of complex roof shape with the snow on top, but I'm just gonna trying to draw the shape to the best of my ability here. Here's some bushes and stuff, and the house extend over to the side, some wall, and there's some bushes, and that's about it. There's a little bit of snow in the back here, a little rock here and there, but this is pretty much it. Okay, so very, very simple. Hopefully you can try to follow along. If you need a little bit more time, pause the video and try to draw it. But the key is to keep it simple. Okay, I don't want you to go into the drawing and start to draw little windows and stuff. That's not really necessary here. Okay, so looking at the photo here, the value grouping is actually very, very simple. Okay, there's a benefit to shrunk down the photo like that, even though the reference that I'm looking at is a little bit bigger, but it's not that much bigger. When you're looking at a photo that small, it's almost like you're looking at the scene in a distance, and a lot of details will just vanish, and it will able to help you to keep your scenery, keep your painting simple. I'm gonna clean my palette a little bit, and I'm gonna do a very, very light wash for the sky. Okay, now in the photo the sky is completely white. It's an overcast day and it's snowing, so it's very, very bright. So the sky and the snow, they're almost the same value, but just to kind of get our mindset into painting, I want to do a very, very light first wash. Okay, so a lot of water. So what I'm doing right now is Cobalt Blue and Burnt Umber, a little bit more blue, just so that we can have our gray a little bit cooler. So that's the simple gray. Make sure that I do Cobalt Blue and Burnt Umber, and I want to have my blue a little bit cooler, so I add a little bit more blue. Okay, and quite a bit of water, and I'm using a brush that's quite big, the biggest brush that I have, and it's my signature brush as well. So I know this performed pretty well thanks to Craftable, and it's sold out currently. So if you're interested, go to their website and sign up for notification. Anyways, continue on. So keep reloading my brush. Actually, a little bit more water doesn't hurt. Okay, and we see just a tiny little bit of value here, not much at all. But now that we are moving our wash down, we see this bead right here. Okay, and when we get to the rooftop area, we're going to be a little bit careful and try to paint around it, try to create that wash around it. If we zoom in a little bit, you're going to see. Okay, we're going to paint around that. There's a little bit of that there, so we're going to add that in. Okay, so something like that. And I'm going to paint around this rooftop here, so we get a bit of highlight for the snow. Okay, and there we have it. There we have it. And the rest of it is just going to be snow. So what I'm going to do is just to wash my brush and pretty much just kind of clean brush, clean water, and just finish this wash all the way down. Okay, so almost as if that thing happened because the wash is so light. But now let's do something a little bit more fun. While it is still a little bit moist, I'm going to mix a good amount of paint for our background tree. Now we're going to start with our neutral gray, which is burnt umber, cobalt blue. Now we're going to try to make it a little bit warmer, so a little bit more burnt umber here. And we'll try to mix more paint too, because we want this paint to be just a bit more paint, a bit more opaque. Okay, so you can see the difference, right? It's pretty much the same color, just a little bit warmer, but you can see the value difference. Okay, and now I'm gonna start to paint the tree, and don't be afraid looking at this and think this is so dark, because I'm painting a little bit wet onto wet and watercolor dry lighter. It's not going to be as dark as you think when it's dry. So I'm gonna moving my camera a little bit. Now don't worry about the amount of tree that's there. Paint a single shape. You can have a little bit of detail, bits and pieces on the top, on the silhouette, on the edges, but for the most part, just paint a simple single shape right there. Okay, and enjoy that wet onto wet. This is magic right here. This is what watercolor is about. Okay? Don't be afraid when the watercolor starting to spread out, trying to do its thing. Let it do its thing. Okay? If you mix the right consistency, it's going to do great things for you. Don't try to control it. Don't try to fight it. Just let it do its thing. Okay? And now here, we try to be a little bit more careful. We try to preserve that snow white rooftop, so we can connect into the part that's didn't cover by the snow. But other than that, we just paint that, and some area dries a little bit, so we can have a little bit mixture of soft edge and dry edge. Reload our brush. Okay, if your brush is running out of paint, don't keep painting with dry brush. Reload your brush. Okay, some more. Here, and just swirl a little bit. Side of the brush. Play with your brush, see what kind of mark you can get. A little bit of thin shape here for the pine trees in the back. Okay, there's a house there, but let's just make it simple by just ignoring it. Okay, and we'll try to keep that snow cap there on top of this bunch of bushes or whatever it is. Okay. A bit more paint here. And now I'm gonna add some red. Gonna add some red to this gray mixture. There's some red trees in the front. And I am just going to add that in to this shape. Add it into the shape so they're wet onto wet, so they merge together. Okay, even if you look at the photo, if you squint your eyes, it all melts together. So just make sure your mixture are not too wet. Okay, you want a little bit more consistency, you want a little bit more creamy consistency paint. Add a little bit of cobalt turquoise to introduce tiny little bit of green. Okay. I fresh squeezed those burnt umber because I was running out, so it's a little bit easier to mix a very dark mixture. But other than that, other paints, they're dry paint. I just spray some water on it and let them and revive them. The paint that I use are mostly Daniel Smith's, but the blue are from My Mary Blue. So I use different variety of paint. I don't only use one single brand, so sometimes it's a little bit hard to answer what paint do I use because they're all kind of different. Okay, so coming down here. Here's a part that might be a little bit tricky, but just keep in mind you want to connect the shape. So here's a little bit of bush here. I'm leaving a bit of light white area for the tree trunk and the branch. Again, just a few, okay? Just even though you look at the photo, there's a lot of branches. Let's keep them simple, okay? So a bit of snow cap here. So I leave that white there. As long as you don't connect this, the bead is gonna be there and you can paint around it. It's not going to get into the dry area unless it's very, very wet, unless the bead is too heavy. I paint a little bit tilted, so the bead will gather on the bottom. Okay, so looking good. A bit more down here, and now I'm gonna paint into the house right there. This part's supposed to be light, and I think the bead comes down a little bit too far, so I'm just gonna use a paper towel, press and get rid of that bead. Okay, let's continue on. A little bit of the green to it. Okay, the paint is getting a little bit too wet here, so I'm gonna just mix a new pile here so they're not as much water. Okay, looking good here. So watch out for your paint consistency. At this stage, we want to have middle value or even darker, so you want to paint that's not too wet. Okay, underneath the rooftop, paint that there. And there's a little bit of warmth to it, so I'm gonna introduce a bit of burnt umber. Mix that into the mixture, so it's still going to be the same value, but with a little bit of warmth to it. So it's very subtle. And I know there's 2 windows and stuff there, but again, let's keep it simple. Okay? And this is your painting, this is our painting, so we do whatever we want. Okay, let's fix this shape a little bit, make it a little bit straighter here. Okay, and now the stuff back there, still a little bit wet there. That's okay. We're just gonna paint and add a bit mixture here so that we can have a better separation between the roof and the background. There's a little bit of house back there, and squint your eyes while you're trying to paint this. Okay, so here I'm just grabbing a random mixture. Okay, a little bit of bush right here, and connect that to this. I'm just gonna call it shape because I don't want to try too hard to identify what that is. Some bushes, some wall, whatever it is, returner wall. There we go. Okay, it's just a shape. And down here is our bench, so I'm gonna do another mixture. Just very simple shape right here, the seat and the leg of the bench, and that's about it. Bit of a rock here. Okay, and down here we don't want to keep it that neat, so maybe break it up a little bit so that feels like it's snow piling up. Okay, not everywhere though. Don't start to make it into a pattern. So just maybe I'll keep this straight, but maybe a couple area, just a little bit of bumpiness. Okay, and I think as they are drying, they're going to start to become a bit lighter and lighter. So I'm going to grab some neutral tint. And look at the photo, there's some really dark area inside here. So I think I will just add some neutral tint into it. Wet onto wet, so they melt into the shape. There's a door here. I think this might be a restroom. Actually, it might be a restroom. Or, to speak like Canadian, is a washroom. Okay, so I'm gonna connect that roof to the bush back there, and I think we can also add some more dark value down there. Now the tree trunk, they are not that white, but we can wait for them to dry and then glaze over them a little bit. Okay, there's a little bit of windows and stuff back there. Okay, and here we're just finishing up some of these shapes here. Okay, here, and this is pretty much it. One last thing that I'm going to do is that this white area seems a little bit too ambiguous. They just kind of connect to the background. So I'm going to paint a little bit of grass underneath the snow right here. Just a little bit here to suggest a little bit of separation. Okay, so that and your mind just kind of complete this line. You do see a little bit of pencil line here, but this little bit of shape helps. So very, very simple painting. Now this is still wet, so I'm not able to glaze over. So I'm actually going to try to blow this dry. Wait for it. So I'm going to wait for this to dry and do a glaze on top so that this tree won't pop out too much. Okay, so I blow this dry, so hopefully this is dry enough now. So I'm just gonna grab whatever mixture I have here and just do a quick glaze over. And I hope you can end up with some snow scenery that you like. Again, this is what I like about snow scenery: the brightness, the contrast, the simplicity, and the quietness of a snow day. Hopefully you can follow along and enjoy. I hope you enjoyed that simple painting demo. Now I want to share with you another painting that's a bit more complex. This is a painting from a photo I took near my home. This part of the neighborhood is usually very bland. The house is also very old and beat up if you look at it up close, but snow makes it look very clean and beautiful. So I decided to paint this special moment of a typical street scenery. Okay, let's take a look. Okay, so let's take a look at this painting. Since this painting is a little bit more complex, I am going to do a value study first. So start off with a very simple drawing. Since this is a value study, the drawing is very, very loose. And you might notice that the way I draw is very similar from the small painting demo that I did earlier. So aside from staying loose, I try to connect my line without lifting my pencil. This will get me into the mindset of connecting the shape that I see. So here I'm just making some indication where I'm going to paint the shape so that it'll be a little bit easier once I started to make my wash. So the first wash for the value study is the middle value. So we start off with the tree and we start to connect the tree shape to the house. And we need to preserve the snow on the rooftop. So we're actually painting negative space around the white. This might not feel natural for you if you are used to painting with oil, acrylic, or even digital. Usually we paint light on top of the dark value, but in this case, we're preserving the light by painting darker values around it. And to do that, you need to plan ahead. So that's why value study is a very good way to prepare you from painting the final painting. So as you can see, we connect all of the middle value shape together. This is just a two value painting right now, but it works. The two values created a major shape that is easy to read. And this also creates a basic sense of lighting, and that helps to read the three-dimension quality of it. So as we wait for the first wash of the value study to dry, I'm going to start and draw the final painting. This is a bigger paper, so the line drawing is going to be just a little bit more refined. But as you can see, I try to approach it in the same way. I try to connect the line and the shape. And since this is the second time I am drawing the same subject, I already had a practice in the value study. So that helps me to draw this scenery a little bit faster. And I get to do some changes that I wanted to. So here I switched to a mechanical pencil. The line will be a little bit thinner and cleaner. And I try to draw some cleaner, straighter lines and try to get the structure in. Still, I try to connect the line, try not to lift the pencil as much as possible. Draw the car in the distance in a little bit more detail. continue on and just make a little indication on the trees. I usually don't like to draw too much trees with pencil. I like to paint that with paintbrush using different brush strokes to create trees. Okay, now back to our value study. The first wash of value study is pretty much dry, so I can paint another layer on top, and this time I am adding darker value. So starting from the pine trees on the right and adding some darker shadows on the house, underneath the roof, and some darker paint, some darker bushes, and adding a little bit of thickness of the snow that's accumulated on the sidewalk. Tree branches. And when you're painting darker value, also try to connect them if possible. So I have the background trees connect to the wall of the house and also to the bottom of the cars. And here I'm adding some darkest dark. So some occluded shadows, the tree trunk, and underneath the car wheel. And here is our very simple value study. And I am going to use it as a guide for my final colored painting. So here I start with my color version and take a look at my value study. Wipe my palette clean so I can start with some clean colors. Clean up some pencil lines, and here we go. So I start with the sky, but the sky is a very light, overcast day sky, so it's mostly very light. So I just painted with a very, very washed out, cool gray color. The important thing here is to start introduce some yellow colors for the tree. And I want to do that wet onto wet, so the color and the shape will be soft. So put those color in there. And I also tap a little bit to spray a little bit of color on top just to make it a little bit more loose. And like the small painting demo I did earlier, don't be afraid of wet onto wet. That's watercolor at its best. So we continue our wash down, start to do a basic wash on the house, and we preserve the light by painting around it. So we keep the snow as white as possible by just leaving it the paper white. So the first wash should be very light. Aside from the yellow tree leaves that I just painted, everything else is really light. The main purpose of the first wash is to paint the color of the light, but also to get you into the mindset of painting, because it can be daunting at first to put the paint on the paper. So a very light wash can help you get into it without feeling too scary, because when it's dry, it can fade back almost into nothing. So even if you make a little bit of mistake, it's usually not that big of a deal. So we start our second wash, which is the middle value, and as soon as I put down middle value, the first wash almost fade back into nothing. But mentally, I was much more prepared. So like the value study, I start with the tree on the back, and this is going to be a big major shape, so I'm going to try to connect the shape together. And as I do that, I try to mix different warm and cool colors into this shape, so it looks a little bit more interesting. Connect that to the tree in the middle. And the first wash is dry, so as I'm painting the leaf into it, it's going to be dry. And I'm painting using some dry brushing, so what I do is I paint really fast and use the texture of the paper to create some texture of the leaves. So avoid painting individual leaves. Don't dab around too much. Use the texture of the paper. Use different brush strokes. So we start the shape from the trees on the right and through the middle, now to the background tree. And we connect back to the house. And I want to finish the tree, so I start to paint the tree in the background. So even though there are a lot of trees in the photo and it can look very complex, but if you connect the shape together, you can convey the sense of lushness without painting all the detail that you see. And for the most part, it's usually a little bit more interesting to leave the detail out for the viewers to feel that detail in their mind instead of trying to paint every single little detail for them to see. And like I shared a little bit earlier, I believe a nice snow scenery is to have a simplified image, is to keep it simple. So a good way to keep the image simple is to connect the shapes. So you see me leave out a little bit of white to hint the accumulation of the snow on top of the car and different surfaces. But other than that, I just connect the shape together. Just within that shape, I have different warm and cool colors to make it look a little bit more interesting. But just like you see in the value study, I'm actually painting quite a simple image. So as you can see, I am following the plan that I set out for myself. If you change this image to black and white right now, it will look very similar to the value study that I painted earlier. So even though the image is very simple right now, you can kind of see the structure taking places, and then you can also see the light and some sense of snow. So it's very simple, but I do need to think about color a little bit. That being said, the colors are very simple. It's just different warm and cool grays. And like I mentioned earlier, the snow scenery that I paint, I want it to be quiet and calm. So I don't want a lot of color popping everywhere. So as I'm painting, as I'm looking at the photo, I'm also constantly remind myself what's the most important thing I want to present to the viewer as I paint. What I want to share with you is how I feel when I am standing in that snow scenery, not a lot of detail like the photo. And again, I am not against photorealistic painting, but I'm just not the kind of artist that can do a lot of photorealistic details, so this is the route that I'm taking. So now I am painting the third layer, which is the dark value. So I paint from the tree on the right again because they are darker than the middle value. And this also gives me another chance to add just a little bit more detail. Here I'm scratching a little bit to hint some tree branches. And I switch to a much smaller brush so I can make some delicate marks. Just because I'm trying to keep my painting loose doesn't mean that I don't care about the shape that I paint at all. To have different variety of shapes in your painting is still very important for your painting to look interesting and lively. So I continue to paint the dark shapes and connect them together to the trees on the left in the distance. And as you can see, as I paint the dark shapes, the white snow on top of the roof, they become lighter. So we're using contrast to create more brightness and create more light. So sometimes if you feel your painting is not as bright as it should be, the sense of lighting is not as strong, it might not be because it's not light enough. It might be because the dark is not dark enough. You need enough dark to bring out the light. Add a little bit more leaves. And this stage is actually quite tricky because it's very easy to overwork. So I have to constantly remind myself to keep it simple, to make just enough indication and leave it. And here I'm painting some dark Underneath the roof, some occluded shadow, some windows. The dark value here are mostly in the middle value. So we're just adding a little bit more detail and push the contrast and also create the structure by adding another layer of value. And this stage is very important. We want to keep it nice and simple. So keep every brushstroke count. Don't start to dab around and try to paint too much. We just need a little bit more detail and indication to make it look complete. Painting some details on the car, adding some dark to the tire and the bottom of the car. A little bit of detail and textures on the road, adding some shadow on the side of the snow to create some volume. Snows are pretty thick, so adding a little bit of shadow will help. A tiny little bit of details on the rooftop. There are some areas the snow didn't get to, and chimney and things like that. Adding some darkest dark. And here I do a quick glaze on the road, so the snow on the side looks brighter. And we are finished. I hope I successfully conveyed the sense of peace and quiet of this snow scenery in this painting, and I hope you enjoy this demo. So that's it. I hope you'll like this video and find it helpful. If you do, please consider giving it a like, subscribe if you haven't. We are in the holiday season and I wish you safe and happiness. A lot of crazy things happened this year, but I hope I can offer just a little bit of peace and joy with my videos and paintings. Take care and be well. I'm Eric from Cafe Watercolor. See you next time.